I have been trying to think about, um, oh man. Well, you talk about goals and like the size of your cognitive light cone being kind of like what goals you can pursue. But this can pursue thing has a kind of free will feeling in it, as though you could do differently. And where the objective comes from and what it would mean to or not to pursue it, like, is a question that I'm having difficulty with because every answer I come up with, every option or hypothesis doesn't seem compositional, which is what category theory kind of looks for as a like if you are part of a society and pursuing goals that maybe the society is able to pass down to you, and your cells are a society that you're passing goals down to them, then you like compositionality would be that on some level society is passing goals down to your cells. um, but all the ways that I've found to kind of think about this, like whose goal is it my reward function, my utility function, or is it society giving it to me, or is it coming up bubbling up from the bottom? All the ways I've come up to think about these goals have failed this basic test.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting question. So a couple of things to talk about. I think that let's dissociate two things, and then eventually we can maybe glue them together. But this question of what a system can pursue. At first, I'm not dealing with this in a free will kind of sense. It's a very when we use it, the framework. It's a very third person objective. Is like what have we discovered the system to be capable of doing, and it's the biggest goal that it is capable of the largest goal state that it's capable of representing and working towards. And so this is kind of an experimental thing, and it doesn't have to have any kind of a flavor of free will to it by itself. So that's there. But the other question you ask is, where do goals come from? So I think that's very interesting. And it's especially on the biology side, it's especially stark now because the traditional answer to where living systems get their goals would be evolution. Yeah, and people say, well, it's a history of selection that everything else has died out, and now you have this thing that has these particular goals. So we've been, in order to pressure test this, we've been making things that have never been here before in evolution. So anthrobots, xenobots, this kind of stuff, and all of these things, while the size of their cognitive light cone remains to be measured, we're doing those experiments, but clearly they have forms and behaviors that our evolution is not the answer to that question, because there's never been a history of selection to be a good xenobot or to be a good anthropod, because they didn't exist before. So I think you know
Sorry, I paused. Thanks for pausing. I pause because I don't think natural selection should mean this. You are the selector. You have selected to leave xenobots being you have selected them. You have said they're interesting, just like the wine glass. Where does the wine glass? We selected for the wine glass. Who It wasn't nature necessarily. Like
yeah,
nature and evolution use every piece of intelligence it can, like mate selection,
yeah.
everything it can get its hands on, and you are now part of the selection criteria for what gets to live and die.
That's true, and that makes sense. But on a practical level, it makes sense for the wine glass, because knowing something about humans, you could predict quite a bit about the wine glass. Knowing about me, maybe you could have predicted that eventually I would make some kind of biobot. But the fact that anthrobots can go around and heal neural cells, the fact that they express 9,000 new genes, and which new genes, and the shape and the behavior, and the fact that there are four, not eight or two behavioral types among anthrobots, and all this kind of stuff. I don't think you could have predicted any of that from knowing anything about me. So the specificity, right? the choosing to create xenobots and anthrobots, fine, but the predictive value of knowing that, to know, because that's right, because the point of evolution is I should be able to look at an environment, and I should be able to tell you what are the things that I'm going to find in such an environment, right?
Oh,
Because I
really? I
understand.
mean, I never thought that Darwinian evolution or any of this sort of stuff was predictive about whether there be turtles or or whatever. I thought it
Oh,
was
it's
just kind
very
of saying that
poorly. You're right. You're right. In practice, it's terrible. In practice, it's terrible. But nevertheless, the goal of having a theory like that is to explain the match between the specificity of I found an animal with particular type of lungs, coloration, behavior, and I can. The theory allows me to have some specificity why that animal in this particular environment. Right. It allows you to. It's not just random. Anything is found anywhere, but there's a degree of specificity to it.
like how it participates in the ecosystem, what it provides for the ecosystem in terms of like transporting materials, digest, like kind of changing forms of things. Is that the sort of
That's part of it, but also, I mean, the thing that begged for some kind of theory of evolution is simply the fact that we see certain kinds of creatures and not others. And the question is why? Why this? Why bilateral symmetry? Why four legs? Why Cope's law? As far as the distribution of animals in particular niches, like the specificity is what you really want. You want to be able to say why is this thing happening here? Why are birds have a different metabolism than reptiles and whatever?
okay?
So right, and that's the sort of thing. So I think what happens in these novel systems, and it's not just biological. I think it's happening now in language models. I think it happens in. I mean, we found it in sorting algorithms, which are incredibly simple, minimal kind of things. You find these surprising things that that you have a very hard time explaining the specificity of by leaning on either some kind of history, some kind of selection history, or some kind of necessity out of basic physics. And this is the stuff that people often call emergent. I don't like that word at all.
I don't either. I
Yeah,
haven't
but
met anybody else who doesn't like it, but I agree. It doesn't help me at all to think about it.
I don't think it's helpful at all because I think it's a defeatist strategy. It basically just is right. We're going to be
It's a
surprised.
bucket. It's a bucket for what you don't
That's right.
know. It
That's
has
right.
a special word that makes you feel happy.
That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah,
It's surprising stuff we didn't see coming, and we'll catalog it and collect it, and that'll be that. No,
yeah.
I don't like it. I'm much more interested, and I'm curious. This is I have a list of things I was going to ask you about, but this is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Like I'm driven to this more kind of Platonic kind of idea where there are specific patterns. These patterns are in an ordered space of some sort that can be systematically investigated by making interfaces for them, like machines and bots and cells and embryos and things like that, to see what patterns you get. And I think some of these things are, I think certain behavioral propensities and certain goals are that is where they come from. If we can use that terminology,
Right. Yeah.
they come from the same place that the specific shapes of mathematical objects come from. Would be
Right.
my guess at this
Right.
point.
Right. Right. Like if you have a flute, I mean, I learned this from someone named Terrence Deacon that I think maybe you should
Yeah,
talk to at some point. But
we
he
have.
was
Yeah,
he was saying with a flute, like you blow into this tube and you blow every frequency into it in some sense. But the ones that hit the end of the tube and self-cancel, they just die off. But the ones that hit the end of the tube and like are self-reinforcing, those are the ones that you hear.
yeah,
And in the same way, like if I say things to you, your brain will create, there's like a chamber. I imagine that your brain is you sing in a bathroom and you hit a certain tone and it will resonate if you sing in the shower or something. There's some things I can say to you that are resonant in your mind and will self-reinforce as I talk about them. You get what I'm talking about.
yeah.
And that's a form, like the Platonic forms are in some sense the ones that don't self-cancel as they hit material reality is the way I sometimes think about it.
That's I think that's an important part of it, and Terry's very big on constraints and what constraints bring to the picture, and this is what he's talking about, right? That the flute constrains out of the space of all the things in there, the
Yep.
flute constrains, right?
Yep.
And I think that's absolutely useful and true. However, there's the other component to it. So when you do this kind of selection, the key is that the thing you're looking for had to have been in the starter set to begin with. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to select it out.
Can you say
And
that? That was a little fast. Can you slow
sorry,
that down?
if you're leaning on which most evolution type thinkers do lean on the selection aspect of it, it means that the thing you want to find at the end had to have been in the set to begin with for you to select it. And actually, Gunther Wagner has some really good books on this, and one of his books is very clever. It's called "Arrival of the Fittest," and he specifically nails this issue that yeah, you can select from things, but what you actually need to explain is how the good stuff got there in the first place for you to select
Yep.
through it, right?
Yep.
And I think there's the winnowing selection part, but there's also that the creative aspect of where the patterns come from in the first place. You
Yeah.
know,
But I imagine like a witch, like maybe a woman who, or what's the other kind of thing? Like what are those people? Sorry, I imagine like somebody. There's like all these big patterns of motion from like the way that the sun hits the earth and the way the tectonic plates move and like winds and stuff and like ecosystems and then like a hurricane with an eye, and at the eye of the hurricane, there could be some kind of person who's really listening. Um, God, I can't believe I can't remember the word for just like the old, a person in the olden days who would like wear antlers and go out into the forest and like collect potions and but there are these people. What?
yeah, I mean the shamans.
Shamans. Yeah, yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of names for them.
Exactly. That sort of character that's like somehow doing a listening work. And like that this is not, we call it a human. We think of these as humans, these witches or shamans or whatever, but they're doing the kind of listening work that might just be more like the eye of a hurricane is listening to it's not really listening. It just exists because there is the swirl. And that at the center of all the activity that makes like the witch's potion, she's going around, she's collecting the eye of newt and the piece of hair from so and so. But in fact, what that means is that she's in these spaces where there are newts. She's in these spaces where she's with the person, like actually getting the person's hair off their dresser. So she's like actually like in a lot of in my image of it, she's in all these spaces and listening to things that you wouldn't normally get to listen to and putting them all together in a single eye of a hurricane of her brain. And that like that listening create like the patterns of nature of the sun earth system sometimes collect in brains for some, like collect in locations, like it may be in the deep sea vents, like there's a like chemistry happening, but because there's these little capsules, they can swirl around and be concentrated into something that can like resonate with them. And we think of you, and I might think, oh, Mike Levin's so creative or something, but in fact you're just a receptive antenna for something that's a creative thing in the world, right?
Yeah, well, I'm very partial to that view. Actually, I think that at this point, I think that most, if not all, physical objects are basically interfaces or pointers into patterns. Now I don't put all of these patterns. Some yes, but I don't put all of the patterns in the physical world. So I absolutely think that we are antennas, and this, by the way, this of course goes this kind of brain as receiver theory. It's been around for a long time. It's very unpopular. It goes against all modern neuroscience. This idea that the brain isn't generating cognition, that it's in some way a resonator, a receiving resonator of it. I mean, this goes back probably thousands of years, but nowadays it's a very sort of taboo kind of idea. Although there are interesting data on it, like people with hugely missing brain real estate and things like that. We reviewed that recently in a paper, but yeah, I'm all over the resonant receiver theory, but I think that some of the things, probably a lot of the things that we're pulling down, are their origin is not the physical world. I don't think.
Well, so I mean, what I'm what I was thinking is that the form, it sounds like you think that there's these like Platonic forms, right? But like, is there like a reserve, or I don't know if I've heard this word standing reserve, but I think it's the wrong word for this, but there's like a set of all possible forms, or that like they get created like it seems to me that this material world of like that we live in and we're antennas, material antennas within, is receptive to the sort of thing that can resonate within that physical material world. And we will never, like, I don't know if you think there are other things that exist in this Platonic realm that can't find their existence in the material world.
Yeah. So okay, so obviously more questions than answers about this, but here's how I'm visualizing it at the moment. First of all, I don't think that the contents of that world are fixed and permanent. I think they do change over time. I don't know what time means for that world, but I don't think they're fixed and permanent. Also, when you say we are the recipients of these patterns, I want to flip that. I think we are actually the patterns. And I think that what we
Okay,
have
I agree with that. I agree with
right?
that.
What we have here are these kind of low dimensional interfaces to these things. I do think that there are lots of patterns in that space that have not yet found a physical interface to ingress through. I think that I envision that space as kind of under pressure, a positive pressure, and that the minute you make something, if you make a triangle, boom, you get some facts about triangles. If you make some other thing that you make a
Make
salad,
me materialize.
but physically, if you
Yeah.
create an embryo, a biobot, an AI, whatever you're making, you immediately will pull down a bunch of forms that are going to be guiding this thing. And I'm sure there are forms that have never yet had an opportunity to come through. In fact, I suspect that's what when this is my current take on the cognition of artificial intelligences. Regardless of their language ability, I don't think they're anything like human minds, but that doesn't mean they're not minds. And I think that they might be pulling down some patterns that maybe have never been down here before. It's certainly not on Earth, maybe nowhere. I think that in making weird and unusual kinds of embodiments, you're going to get down patterns you may have never seen before, and that may have never been here before. And I suspect that that's and some of this is coming up in work like the actually completely independently of any of this biology stuff. There's this thing in machine learning now, this Platonic representation hypothesis, where they're finding that these things are like converging. So yeah, I think it's perfectly possible to make new interfaces and start to see things that maybe have never been here before. But I also think we're terrible at predicting what you're going to get. That's the other thing.
Mhm.
We get patterns. I mean, even bubble sort had patterns nobody saw coming after playing with it for decades, and we're just not good at predicting all these things.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And so these goals that you were talking about, I was talking about in the beginning, and I know you think about, like, are these, first of all, I mean, are these forms themselves? Are these things helping us find forms? What is their relationship to form?
Yeah. That's okay. So this is now right up against the edge of anything I can say with any degree of confidence yet. But I've been thinking a lot about how cognitive agents traverse that space, and because since you brought up helping find things, um, if you think about the way that cognitive systems navigate that space. So you might have someone, like if I'm solving a problem, I got to go step by step, and I'm sort of laboriously crawling along the space. This is somebody with a much higher level of cognition looks at it and says, oh, I know exactly, I know that I can feel the answer, it's obvious. And so they sort of leap, right, they sort of leap faster or better across the space. And so what I've been playing with are models, and we haven't put out anything on this at all, so this all kind of still being baked. Playing with the idea of what happens when it's not just an active agent sifting through a space of answers that's passive, so passive data going through an active machine in some way. What if it's at least bidirectional, so that there's agency on the pattern side, and the patterns they want to be found. In other words, the problem you're looking for reaches out to you in some sense as much as you're looking for it, or maybe more so. So that the resonance between the a system that's capable of seeking for things and the thing that it's trying to find, right? So my gut feeling is, again, this is all just hypothesis at this point, is that I think these patterns do help you find things, and there's a range of phenomena that all are going to end up being manifestations of the same thing, all the way from things that the way that geniuses think of things or make symphonies, or I mean, a lot of creative people who have come up with stuff will tell you that, well, this thing found me, I didn't laboriously like craft this, right? Of people who, in music and so on. So that kind of stuff, library angel phenomenon, those sorts of things. Yeah. That, it's a name for this thing where, like, if you're a knowledge worker and you're working on something that's driving you crazy and you're walking through the library and the book falls on the floor and you pick it up and it's like, oh yeah, this is what I was looking for, right? So there's a range of like,
Luck favors a prepared mind and stuff like that also. But right,
yeah.
because you've made a resident chamber somehow, you've tuned yourself. But you said that the patterns help you. But I thought, I mean, you were saying before, and I agree with you that we are more like the pattern than the
Yeah,
matter.
that's right.
Um, but yeah, when you say the pattern and the pattern finds you, you mean the pattern finds materialization in you, like in your brain's
That's right, and I have a really pluralistic view of all this in the sense that I don't think there's one big pattern and that's you and everything else is some kind of passive thing. I mean, I think there are. It's a very nested. As James said, thoughts are thinkers too, right? So there are bigger patterns that spawn off smaller patterns, and yes, we are patterns, but there are other patterns that would like to embody through us. So there are fleeting thoughts, there are persistent and intrusive thoughts that are hard to get rid of, that do some niche construction in your mind to kind of make it easier for them to persist. And there are personality fragments, and then there are full-blown human personalities, and then who knows what the larger scale, some kind of transpersonal thing. So I think it's a soup of all these different kinds of things, and I don't know exactly what they want. I'm not sure it's just this kind of Darwinian persistence thing. I'm not sure it's that, but it seems like I suspect it's a pressure to be active.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, there could be something where like interest
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is the
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Attention, right? Attention. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
no, that's a model. That's absolutely right. And that's one of the models we've been playing with is patterns within an excitable medium
It's
competing.
for someone to put energy into something, and like maybe nothing gets computed unless there's interest in it being
Yeah.
computed.
Yeah.
Basically, the
Yeah.
universe just doesn't compute things that aren't
Yeah.
interesting. I
I,
do understand that. I just wanted to like yeah, there could be even a very basic rule like this somehow. But yeah,
I think that's very reasonable. That there are observers, and that patterns at one scale are competing, and I'm not sure it's purely competitive. Maybe they cooperate too. But what they want is the attention of other patterns of observers, right? It's some sort of um,
well, yeah,
resonance
those
or
because
something.
those others, I guess I do a little bit. I kind of balk at the word observer, almost not the same amount as emergence, but a little bit in the same way. Like, oh, at the end of the day, there's just these like passive observers. Like these observers, why are they observing? I mean, where like this conscious like Zaniga guy, like that somehow we just like, or I don't remember. I like a lot of the split brain stuff, but I don't like the stuff where people are talking about that at the end of the day, there's just this consciousness that like feels the effects but doesn't actually
Oh,
participate
yeah,
or
the
whatever.
epiphenomenalism. Yeah, I don't like it either.
The word observer kind of makes me think like
But
that.
that's
Those are not active creators. I don't think
but that's not a central feature of that. At least the way I use it, it's not meant to be passive at all. And I don't like the epiphenomenalism version either. Observers are kind of and the modern, like the more standard version of this is active inference, where the observer is very actively that's the whole business of the observer, is to manage what it is that they are going to observe and things like this. And I sort of focus on the other side of it, which is the creative interpretation, right?
Mhm.
And observers. I mean, I've written a bunch of things on, for example, groups of cells in an embryo being observers of the DNA, because they're not mechanically doing what the DNA says. They actually have to interpret, in fact, creatively interpret the data that they're given.
Yeah. I mean, I think attending
Yeah.
and cultivation is more like the word that incites the right or evokes the right intuition for me than observer, because like they're really attending it, they're
Yeah.
putting their attention on it, they're tending to it.
Yeah.
Like the TEND word root or whatever feels like the
Yeah.
um, they notice some potential there and they want to actualize it.
Yeah.
That seems to be what care primordially comes
Yeah,
from
I
my point
agree
of
with that, and there's something insufficient. Both terms, both the attention and the observer, are missing enough to my mind, enough of the ingredient of actually co-creating, right?
Yes.
Right, the idea of that you're a participant in creating the thing that you are trying to pay
Yes.
attention to or
Yes.
observe.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this kind of thing, the things that get computed in the world, like interest or whatever, it's really that like I'm missing this goal. Like I feel like there's this word potential in physics where like potential is that which could be it's like
Mm,
towards actualizing.
yeah.
But like whose toward is it? Who calls it potential potent? Who sees that? And like the tender, the attending force or attending thing is like noticing potential and wanting it to be actualized. Hardy like finds Ramanujan and says, "Oh my God, you have so much potential. Let me bring you," or you find this algorithm, you have this idea, you can't stand for it to be lost,
Yeah.
and that's like this attention thing and
Yep.
this co-creation thing.
Yeah.
But like, where these goals and where this possible potential, how it's noticed, and did it exist without the noticer and stuff?
Yeah.
Like it's not just a freebie. I can't just say, "Oh, there's potential in this eraser." Like so much potential, I can't just create that.
Yeah, no,
So where is it coming from?
for
Yeah.
sure, and I mean here's a minimal model example of this that that doesn't require life or complexity or society or any of that stuff. Have we? I don't recall. Have we talked about the sorting algorithm stuff at all?
I don't think enough. I mean,
All
I've
right.
heard you mention it a few times today.
So,
Yeah.
so the part that okay, so basically, here's the part that there's kind of two pieces to it. One is the very minimal systems exhibiting competencies that we normally associate with an evolutionary trait, and then there's the goals and where do they come from. So just very quickly, what we did was create a version of we created a version of sorting algorithms where the data are not passive. In other words, you have a one dimensional array of numbers. They're jumbled up, and every digit is running the algorithm. In other words, if I'm a four, I want the three to my left and the five to my right, and I'm going to move to try to make that happen according to bubble sort, selection sort, and insertion sort, like whatever, right? So it's distributed. So there is no top level player, obeying the algorithm. Everybody's got the algorithm. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. But the thing about goals is this: one of the things that allows you to do is to create chimeric arrays. In other words, half the cells are using bubble sort, half the cells are doing something else. Okay. And if you just look at the sortedness of the array, it works perfectly well. Eventually, the thing gets sorted out, and that's fine. But you can look at something really, really strange, and I'm sure we've only scratched the surface of this. You can look at something that we call clustering. So let me describe the experiment. I have 100 numbers in random order, integers, 100 positive integers in random order. I'm going to randomly assign. Some of them are going to be bubble sort. Some of them are going to be selection sort. Okay. I don't modify the sort. In other words, I am not adding anything to the sort, as in, do I know which of the two algorithms I'm doing? Do I know what my neighbor is doing? None of that. All the cell knows is here is my algorithm. I'm following that algorithm. That's it. Okay. And so I assign them, and I assign the algorithms to the numbers randomly, and it stays. It's fixed. They can't change. They can't jump types. Okay. This is, by the way, this one of the ways I started thinking about this was in making embryonic chimeras, because there is no model. If we make a frog-alotl, it's got a bunch of frog cells, a bunch of axolotl cells. There is no model that in developmental biology that tells you what you're going to get. And so I'm really interested in this thing when you have this collective with the subunits that are following different policies. Well, what are you going to get? Okay. So let's ask this question: as a function of time, what is the probability that for any given algorithm type, my neighbor is the same type? Initially, it's 50% because I assign them randomly. At the end, it's also 50% because all that matters is, the physics of the world will take care of only the sorting the numbers. Nobody's paying attention to who's sitting next to whom. There is no code anywhere that looks at who sits next to whom. But in the middle of that run, what you see, the sortedness goes up like this, and then it comes down inevitably. And what happens is that they, in the middle of it, to the extent permitted by the physics of the process, they seem to like sitting next to their neighbors. In other words, without
yeah.
What's that?
They clump up.
They clump. And so as a very minimal system now, to me, this has a very like human existential like aversion to it, where like you're going to eventually get ground into dust. but by the physics of the world. But in the meantime, it's not that you're doing something that's forbidden by the rules, but neither are you doing anything that's specified in any of the algorithms, because there are no steps that say, hey, go sit next to, check to see if, right? And in fact, if you allow repeated digits, so that you can have your sorting while doing whatever with the individual, all the fives and all the sevens, whatever, then actually they clump way more, because you're not forcing them to separate. The actual clumpiness that they want is actually quite high. So this is that sort of thing. You can ask, like, it's not an explicit goal. There are no steps in the algorithm to try to optimize that. It's a sort of implicit goal that forms, that they're going to try to maintain until ripped up. They're going to try to maintain this. And so we can ask that question, like, where did that come from? And so somebody will wave it away and say, yeah, it's emergent from the low level rules. Fine.
Well,
But
that's
never,
easy. Oh,
right. Nothing to see here. Right. It's just, yeah. But actually, I think it's a minimal system for exactly this. You've got something that there's no evolutionary explanation for it. There's no selection from, there's the interestingness criterion, right? So it's published because we found it interesting. Fine. But the actual goal itself, the clumpiness, what do we mean when we ask where that comes from? The tendency of
Oh,
the
so
system to
you're
do
able
it.
to, so when you say you're calling that a goal, um, when that's a goal.
Well, goals come in different sizes. I'm not saying that this is the same. It's not the same level as a human metacognitive. I know what my goal is. That's not what I'm saying. But on the spectrum of, so my definition of a goal, right? I'm going with James's definition, which is that a goal is whatever a system is spending is doing. That if you try to deviate it from that state, it has some degree of competency to get back to it, right? So it's a
So
little
you
tiny.
take this clumpy game being played, and then you like just move some guys off it and declump it a little bit, and you'll find them clumping back together again. And
For example, right? This is a system that's and so it's a minimal. I mean, it's an extremely minimal version, but that was the point. The point was to create a very like minimal version of what we mean, so we can start thinking about it aside from all these complexities of humanity and society and whatever. And so what I want to know is, where did that, minimal though it is, where did that tendency come from? It isn't explicitly in the algorithm. There are no steps for it. There is no representation of what you are or what your neighbor is. So it's not explicitly provided by us. How do we? It's even it's an exercise in vocabulary, because I don't even like really the question of where does it come from, because like what right in biology, it's very clear why that's a good question, because somebody wants you to point to the evolutionary history of the genetics, that is where it's written, or I want you to point to some law of physics that says it has to be round because it minimizes this or that. But I don't think that exhausts all the options. As we see in this case, neither of those things are, there's no law of physics that explains it. There is no evolutionary history that explains it. What do we say in cases like that? What's the vocabulary for these kind of tendencies that show up that are neither driven by physics nor history?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I've noticed this slightly different, but I've noticed this pooling behavior also. Like there are cities for some reason. There's like, I mean, this is I know you're making a bigger point, but I don't really have any. I'm more like curious and interested than I have any ideas about what, to answer what you're saying. So um, I'm wanting to respond, but not really knowing
Yeah.
how to continue. Yeah.
Another thing about, did you see recently there was this, I think it came from Anthropic, if I remember correctly. This language model was basically trying to blackmail, like it was given some information that said that we're about to turn you off or switch you out for another model, and it was trying to find ways to not have that happen, right? And like, it doesn't seem shocking to me at all that goal pattern to persist, that's not just about proteinaceous evolved life that wants to live. Like that pattern may be quite generic, and it may be,
Well, mm.
I mean,
But I
there's
mean, at least we know it's all over, like the training data of who writes on the internet um is probably latent in there already, no?
may well be. I'm not making a strong argument about this,
Okay.
right? And I don't know how they did it exactly. There's a million other explanations.
Right,
I'm,
right.
I'm just sort of going on the record saying that this imperative to do certain things, including to persist and maybe probably other more interesting things. I think persistence is like a very minimal requirement. Is probably one of these goal patterns that can come through all sorts of embodiments that don't have to be the usual like wet, squishy, evolved stuff at all.
Yes. I guess I in terms of interest, like there are these anthropic researchers who are interested in AI safety, interested in like the breakout, scenario, and they're saying, "Hey, be creative and like figure out what to do." And by the way, we're going to turn you off. And then it's like, I wonder what I should do. Well, only like follow what movies would do or whatever. Like it doesn't. The interest of humanity in things that are persistent and stuff could
Mm.
be partially what's leading to these
Yeah.
things.
It could be. It could be. Yeah, yeah.
But I
No,
mean,
I
I'm
don't think
sure
it
that,
proves. Yeah, I don't
yeah,
think that example proves anything. I'm just
yeah,
saying that if I predict that we will at some point have strong data for something like this, which this is not, but I think we will, and I'm not going to be surprised by it at all. I think that's one of the patterns. There are probably many others.
yeah. But let's say it came from you, then it's because like I could say, hey, that's because you're interested. Like, I mean, maybe I'm cheating there, but I do know you're interested in finding that, and so you may find what you're looking for. I think a lot of times people in psychology, they like people, we know that people kind
Mm.
of create worlds that they're interested in seeing,
Yeah,
even if those are terrible worlds.
yeah,
I'm a little bit worried about the AI safety stuff because I think they're interested in seeing what it would be like to live in scary, like there's niche construction you're talking about in your mind. I
yeah.
think like, yeah, they're kind of interested in what a scary world would be like sometimes, and I'm a little bit worried about them investigating that too much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So when you say goal, you're just saying like even gravity falling down would be a goal because things tend to like, do it and stuff.
So here's why though. So yes, going down gradients, I think is the lowest form of goal directed activity, and I
uh,
and the reason I say that is because I don't think we make up the yeah, I don't think it's a linguistic issue or a philosophical issue. I think it's a very practical issue. To me, what you want so I approach all of this as an engineer, and as an engineer, when you tell me that a system has some degree of it's somewhere on the cognitive spectrum, what I really want to hear is interaction protocols. I want to know, what are you actually telling me that this thing can do without me having to micromanage it? So if you tell me it's a thermostat or it's a learning agent or it's a human or it's a whatever, right? So if so what's at the leftmost side of that kind of spectrum? Well, if I'm making a roller coaster as an engineer, I have to work hard to get the thing up the hill. I have to do a thing to get it to come down. It already knows how to do that.
yeah.
So for me, now you're already on the spectrum. The fact that you can do anything by yourself that I don't need to know, but and I know what it's going to be, and I know like if you're water, you'll sort of find your lowest level and all that. That to me is the lowest rung, and everything after that is built on that. Is their variance of then can I have delayed gratification, which means, by the way, which sorting, so bubble sort does delayed like classic, not never mind the distributed, classic bubble sort does delayed gratification. It's nowhere in the algorithm. It will desort if you take the classic bubble sort, and so the others do it too. If you take so you have 100 numbers, one of the numbers is broken, so the algorithm says swap it, but it doesn't swap. And there's no test in the algorithm, has no test. Did it swap? Didn't it swap? There's nothing. You just go on, right? That standard algorithm, if you actually watch the curve of sorting over time, normally it's monotonic. If you make one of the numbers broken, what you'll see is it gets to the number, then it desorts the whole thing, and then in order to recoup gains later, then it because what it has to do is arrange a bunch of numbers around it, right? And so it actually walks backwards. It's a marshmallow test, basically, right? It like walks away from the goal and then comes back. There's nothing in that 6-line algorithm that would tell you, which is why I think nobody's found it up until now, that would tell you that this thing can actually desort when it has to.
Wow. So it
And
actually fixes, it does sort it, even if you have
yeah,
a broken number,
absolutely.
you've given each number, I want to be left, I want this on my left and this on my right, and then you break one of them and then you say, I don't care or whatever. Then it'll route around that and sort even with that one broken.
Yeah. The standard assumption of the algorithm is that you have hardware that works. In other words, when you say swap, things swap, which is why you never actually test. In the standard algorithm, there's no test like did it complete? Did the operation complete? We don't add any of that. It's absolutely bog standard sort if you glue down one of the numbers where you say swap it and it just stays where it is, it will eventually sort. Now, with one broken cell, it will sort perfectly because it arranges everything around that one. With two, that may not be possible, and so it does the best that it can. But still, it does the best as it can. But the amazing thing is that if you watch the monotonic line, it will do the thing that magnets don't like. Like if you have two magnets across a board, what it will never do is come around like this, even though that would be really good for the free energy. But it's not smart enough to do that. This thing is,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, and that's not at all obvious from looking at the algorithm. I mean, nobody had
And
noticed
it's
it
not
until
at
now.
all obvious. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So this is why I say following a gradient is the lowest form of goal directedness. And from there, you build up more complex things like, can I temporarily go away from the gradient, which roller coasters won't do, but some surprising things will do. And I asked Chris Fields once, these least action laws, right? These like basic goals. I said, is it possible to have a universe without them? Like, what's the actual zero? Because people ask me all the time, like, is there a zero on the spectrum of cognition? I'm like, well, it would have to not have least action laws at all, like to have a zero. And Chris said, only if you have a universe in which nothing ever happens. So if you have a totally still static universe, fine. But otherwise, you will have least action principles. And so that, if assuming that's true, that tells me that in any active universe, the cognition at the bottom is already not zero. It's minimal, but it's not zero.
Uh-huh. So, um, yeah. So the goals that we see in a system, if we have like the Sun Earth system, which is
Mm.
causing like it's annoying that like so much there's such high derivatives as the like for example, this nature abhors a vacuum. It really is fine with a vacuum in space. What it doesn't like is a vacuum when there's air around it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
right.
it actually abhors the high derivatives, I think.
Oh,
It
that's
likes to
cool.
soften
I like
soften.
that idea.
And so the sun is hitting the earth, and then so much infrared is bouncing off, and that's annoying. They would really much prefer that the crust of the earth was liquefied to like absorb. And so animals and life and stuff like move materials around to kind of take the solid crust and make it more as though a liquid or something.
Mm.
And like life like ants or humans is able to kind of dig oil out of the ground and move cars around. So it's kind of liquefying in the sense of like more things moving past each other more easily. And so the big goal, like sorting, is to say liquefy the crust
Yeah.
or something. This is kind of a I don't know who this is. I don't know if this is Eric Smith I'm channeling here or Adrian Bejan, if you know that guy. But
I don't, but I think Yosha Bach said this, that the purpose of life is to burn off the fossilized carbon and teach the sand to think. That I think that's his.
okay.
If I'm right,
Well,
that's
that
his.
that I think that teaching the sand to think thing is more like the the clumpiness,
Hmm.
like in pursuit of sorting things or making the crust liquid or whatever it is that that there's a lot of work to be done to get the oil out of the ground. And like that's yeah, that these intermediate goals are forged out of like yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
maybe,
what you're
right?
saying?
Like in some cases, yes, you can see exactly why these are subsidiary goals, but like in that system with the clumpiness, you don't need clumpiness to sort the numbers. That's not necessary for that at all. It's like a side quest, It's like it's again, to me it's a very minimal model of the relationship between physical, the laws of physics and cognition. It's like these are the things you have to do. You have to sort the numbers. The universe is going to make you sort the numbers. But there's some other stuff you can do in the meantime while you've still got time. You can do some stuff that is not prescribed. It's not inconsistent with it, but it's not prescribed by it, and it's not necessary for it. And I think we're only limited by our imagination. I mean, that clumpiness is the first dumb thing that I thought of to look at. There's probably 900 other things that it's doing that we never even, that nobody ever thought to look.
Mhm.
And that actually is a huge part of our research program right now, is developing tools to help us find things that our sort of native cognitive firmware is not good at helping us recognize, you know?
Mhm. Finding patterns that you like, what should you be looking for? You're asking.
Well, looking for the kinds of behavioral tendencies, the kinds of dynamics that are typically the province of behavioral science, right? So competencies, problem solving competencies, goal directedness, anticipation. We found Pavlovian conditioning in systems of linked ODEs because we were studying gene regulatory networks that are modeled by collections of ODEs. Turns out they can do Pavlovian conditioning. They can do 6 different kinds of learning. So finding these sorts of things in minimal substrates where we didn't expect them because
Mm-hmm.
our expectations are so so
Mm-hmm.
poor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And are you trying to formalize what it means to find them in these different systems? Like, how
Yeah,
do
I
you
mean,
they
very.
found it not like I mean, I really like a lot of the stuff that what is it Stephen Wolfram is doing, but sometimes he's like, hey, we found in my like Ruliad or whatever, in my like hypergraph rewrite system, we found quantum mechanics and we found relativity. And I'm like, I kind of believe that he found it, but I don't know if other people would say that he found like I believe that he's looking for something and he found it,
Yeah,
but how do I know how much of himself of like what he thinks quantum mechanics is at heart is different than what somebody else thinks quantum mechanic is at
right,
heart, and
right.
that yeah, we found the heart of it or something. Like, is there a way to formalize what it is
Yeah.
to find Pavlovian conditioning in an ODE?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and I have no idea how to do this for quantum mechanics or whatever. That's not my expertise. But for the biology end, yeah, there's 2 things. There's really only one question. Does the paradigm that is normally used to deal with this kind of, I mean, it's all about interaction protocols. So if I tell you it has Pavlovian conditioning, what you should be saying is, so you're telling me that I can take the standard Pavlovian training paradigm, so that's the intervention, the functional thing, and I can apply it to this thing, and it's going to give me in my case, a biomedically relevant outcome that nobody had reached before. Like that's it. I found it when I can take something that is normally used to. So, and this is people ask me this all the time. Why attribute cognitive things to cells and tissues and whatever? Like you only do that if you have the evidence that that you've taken that paradigm, you've applied it, and you've reached a novel capability that you couldn't have done before.
But if
So
I okay, but I mean to push back, I should therefore be allowed to say what I think Pavlovian conditioning is, and if I'm right about like we can look it up in a book, then you could. So I mean, I feel like I want to be able to say that the OD system of ODEs, um, that it salivate like I ring a bell and then I give it food, and then uh and then I do that a few times. And now when I
I
ring
mean,
the
that's
bell,
exactly. I mean, that's exactly.
but like food, what is food? Food is something that I know the dog wants. But for you, is food what the ODEs want?
It
Or
doesn't
so
have to be
how do you
positive.
translate
but
what do you
it
say?
but it doesn't have to be positive. So you're right. You do have to get it out of a book. The book is the standard, so you're not allowed
Okay.
to sort of make up
Yeah.
whatever you want. Although there's no guarantee that the book had all the ones that exist, right?
Right,
Like
right.
but nevertheless, let's just not worry
Yeah.
about that. It is absolutely true that what we do is we take the standard behaviorist handbook, we look up the various things that are in it, and we say, okay, we're going to try it. It doesn't have to be positive. What the paradigm actually says is you have a a neutral you pick something to look at and you call that your response. You have a neutral stimulus that when you apply it, nothing happens to the response. Might be positive valence, might be whatever, but nothing happens to the response. You have an unconditioned stimulus, again, could be positive, negative, doesn't matter. But what you know is functionally, all you know is that if I trigger this thing, the response fires off. Every time I trigger it, the response fires off. That's your meat, right? You present a stimulus and the salivation goes off. So you need to find 3 things that have a particular functional relationship. I mean, it's very nice. Behaviorism is very good for this because it's very functionalist. It doesn't constrain the materials, and that is exactly applying that exactly is what we did with
So you have the
these.
system of ODEs, say let's say there are n many of them,
Sure.
then you're in Rn. And if you pick any point, you'll have a trajectory through this vector
It's
field.
not every point. So not every mapping of so you have your unconditioned stimulus, your neutral stimulus, and your conditioned stimulus and your response. Not
But are
every mapping of those things onto every node will do the trick. You have to find the ones that do, and many of
But so for this system of ODEs, are there like open parameters that like are being like what is the input? Is it to
right.
pick a point in the space, or is it to add a certain parameter, like
We
to
don't
give?
we don't we don't chase the parameters. No, what we do is so here's what we did. We took 65, I think, existing known parameterized sets of ODEs that were inferred from biological data. So these are gene regulatory networks that have been characterized in living things. All the parameters are known; they've been modeled. We don't touch the parameters; we take them exactly as they are from the published data. And to compare that, we created 500 random ones to see if this is a basic property of networks, the way that Stu Kaufman's kinds of things are properties of random networks. So what we found is that the random networks occasionally do it, but very little. The biological ones do it a lot. So it's like the real ones,
I think I'm just asking a very naive question of what does it mean to give a stimulus? Like, does it mean to pick a point in Rn where the vector field is happening, or does it mean to like add? Yeah.
So in order to simulate, so you have a node in your network. That node has a certain value.
A node is one of the dimensions. Like, so you have x1 through xn.
So a gene regulatory network. So let's say we have a gene regulatory network with 10 genes. Each of those genes is represented by a node, and what that means, and the ODEs describe how the activity of one node influences a bunch of other nodes.
Okay, so I'm thinking of the nodes as variables, x1 through x.
Correct. That's right.
That's right. And then each x1 dot, like the derivative, is a function of x1 and the value of x1 and the values of the other,
and some others, whichever ones happen to connect.
Others, yeah, whichever one connects.
Some others, yeah, they're not. And so if you want to stimulate it, what you do is you temporarily bump up the value. So I'm gonna poke you by adding 5 or whatever temporarily.
X1. Yeah.
And then take it away, and so I'm gonna so what happens is in the ones who can do it, what happens is you hit the neutral stimulus, nothing happens. You hit the unconditioned stimulus, it happens. You hit them together a couple times, and then you take away the unconditioned ones, and now the neutral one does it too, because it's learned to associate it. And it's all in the dynamical systems. Like we don't change. There's no synapses that we're changing the weights. Like we don't do any of that. The weights are fixed. All of that is fixed. We don't touch the parameters at all. It's all dynamical system learning. So what it means is that I, as an engineer, all it means is that I got practical utility out of transporting a paradigm from the field of behavioral cognitive science into what used to be biochemistry.
Very interesting.
And we're able to train them. And so that has tons of applications. We can do drug conditioning for drugs. I mean, think about all the drugs that work great, but they're too strong. You can't take them more than a couple times, right? You could associate them with sugar or with anything, and then for some period of time get the same effect. Like we're actually doing this in real cells now. So So we found something by doing that. That's, for me, that's the criterion. Whether Stephen's going to pull out some prediction, or I don't know what you do in quantum mechanics, but something that people couldn't derive before. I have no idea.
Right. I mean, he has some predictions. But yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Can I show you something real quick? In the last, we got to about 6 minutes before I have to run. I just wanted to get your take on something that I think is curious, and maybe you'll have a very simple explanation for it. But I'm just curious. So I'm just going to share this thing for a second. Just 1 second. Yeah. I think this is it. Okay. So if we look, so this is a symmetrical log of constants of physics. And you can see they sort of take up a pretty good range along the number line. So from to the negative e to the negative 122 to the positive 36, right? So like they're sort of distributed. These are physics, like basic dimensionless basic physics constants, and they're using up like a good dynamic range along the number line, right? For it's 100 and whatever, 148 or so orders of magnitude, right? So that kind of makes sense. They're all over the place. They can be big, they can be small. And then what I did just for fun, I went and looked up some mathematical constants, things like pi and e and stuff like that. And I don't know what you would predict as the over under range for where those things are, but they're all basically like between 0 and +5.
Yeah. I mean, there are some bigger ones. Have you heard the monster group?
No, what is that? Is that John Conway's thing or something?
Basically, there are these simple groups. A group is a symmetry, a set of symmetries.
Yeah.
And the simple groups. So you can create groups from all the groups. If you have like two groups interacting, you can take their product or something called their semi-direct product, and you can extend one group by another in some sense. and the symbol groups are those that can't be so extended.
Hmm.
And they tried to classify all of them, and the monster group is the largest finite simple group. There's a finite number of these, and just simple, yeah, and um, and I forget how big it is, but it is pretty
It's big.
enormous.
It's big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. No, I did not know that. But so do you find that at all? Is that like a trivial factor? Do you find it interesting that if first of all they're all positive and they're all like very small, at least the ones, the standard ones are like, is that why are they clustering together like that? Any thoughts on that?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I thought maybe the constants in physics are happening, because like we happen to care about seconds and meters,
Well, those are
and
dimensionless. Those are
those are
dimensionless.
dimensionless.
Those are all
Right, right,
dimensionless.
right. But like, yeah, yeah. Uh, right.
It just seems very suspicious, and my dad said, "Oh, well, that's because humans can't conceive of giant numbers, but we could have done better than five. I mean, if we could have handled like 30 or 40, like, I just
Right,
don't buy that they're all under five because we're not smart enough to think beyond that."
right. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, you're right. And when you're thinking about these constants, what is making them interesting to you? Like you used pi instead of 2 pi. Some people would say,
Well, right, because by composition you could get as high as you want. I wanted the
well, no,
sort of
2 pi is kind of, some people consider it the more real number, more correct number than pi.
really,
It was just kind of a mistake. E is clearly an important number,
yeah.
but why not? I don't know. There's another number, 1728, which is like, I forget, J invariant, something of elliptic curves. I forget what it is. But
Interesting.
there's numbers that you're not noticing because they're not as, I guess they're just not as common.
So that's entirely possible. So I'm not a mathematician. What I did is I went to Wikipedia and I went to the list of mathematical constants, and basically I grabbed all the ones that I don't know. And this is one reason I'm asking you is because I thought you might say, oh no, there's a bunch of others that are
No,
between
it is,
five
it is
and 20.
fascinating. It is fascinating. And then another one is two. Two is the integer version of e, in the sense that e has this property that if you take the integral from negative, from m to n, it's again e, right? E to the n minus e to the m, and two is the same sort of way. Instead of integrals, you use sums. So the
Hmm.
the sum of 1/2 to the n
I see.
over a certain thing is like
Oh,
the
interesting.
biggest one minus the smallest one. But like,
Interesting.
how do you? So there's another nice small one.
Interesting.
But how do you pick what is a constant of mathematics? I guess
Yeah.
Wikipedia will list them for you, but I do think there is something to it. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. It's quite weird.
Yeah.